Round 9 is only a couple of days away, and before we can sit back and take in another round of football, we need to take the time to reflect and take stock of the previous round. And round 8 provided some of the most memorable moments of the season to date. Join me today as we unpack all the action from round 8, including getting my votes in for the MVP award and revealing my team of the week. This is the round recap. What is going on, YouTube universe? Welcome to the Hip and Shoulder, where we discuss everything Australian rules football. Now, I do want to apologise and preface this video with said apology. I didn't get one out for round 6 or round 7. I just have some things going down in real time that have taken attention away from the screen and, just focusing on what's happening here, what's grounding me in real life. Just know I'm doing okay. I can't talk about it as much as I would love to, but we're returning with some more AFL content, and what better way than recapping a round that saw some very pivotal moments for the 2026 season go down. We saw our first draw. We saw Richmond finally get their first win, and as a Richmond man, boy, am I excited to finally be on the ladder with a win behind us and maybe a little bit of momentum that Richmond can really take on board and start moving with. But before we continue on, you guys watching at home, if you have any ideas or, discussion points you would like to have in relation to content you would like to see me make on this channel, sound off in the comment section down below. Let's talk about it. But the aforementioned draw is what kicked off round 8. Collingwood, Hawthorn at the MCG on Thursday night. This is a rivalry that I always love seeing play out. Two teams that usually are around that kind of precipice of fighting for a top 8 spot, going head to head, and these two teams this year are very differently placed. We have a Hawthorn outfit that looks like a top 4 contender, and we have a Collingwood outfit that has failed to deliver in some retrospect, but then has surprised in other retrospects as well. So we don't know which version of Collingwood we are going to get each and every week, but at least with Hawthorn, we know from the highlights that we have seen this year from them that they have been nothing but competitive. So it was a game that I thought Hawthorn was going to win, just given some outs they had. They had no Tim Membry up forward, no Jeremy Howe in defence. Scott Pendlebury rested after a career best game in the Anzac game the week prior. It had Hawthorn written all over it. And when you look at the game statistically, Hawthorn dismantled Collingwood, but yet Collingwood got more quality from the quantity in which they had and delivered a game that I honestly thought they should have wrapped up, but within the last 90 seconds or so, conceded 2 goals for this draw to go down. Boy, what a way to kick off the round. Holy shit. Again, Thursday night football this year has delivered some absolute belters, and I'm just happy that at least in the prime time slots, us as neutral supporters, not just a Collingwood supporter, a Hawthorn supporter, or any other supporter that has been within that spotlight this year, we've been delivered some great football, and you can't ask for more. With the match timeline, you will see what I'm trying to allude at with the fact that Collingwood got quality from their quantity. At quarter time, they led 5 goals straight 30 to 1-7-13. At half time, they led 7-3 45 to 5-10 40. 12-3 75 trailed Hawthorn's 11-11 77 at 3/4 time, and the final score saw 15-3 93 tied with 13-15 93. There's a lot to break down out of this game. However, I want to highlight the injuries that came out of this game first. Probably none bigger than Harry Perryman doing his hamstring. Up until that point in time, he was playing a negating defensive role against Nick Watson. Nick Watson goes on to kick 2 or 3 goals that were very pivotal in this game, but didn't do so until after Harry Perryman had been essentially ejected from the game through injury. So a huge out, and I feel his role at Collingwood is severely understated and underappreciated by some neutral supporters, because the clampdown role that he is able to play can shift momentum exponentially. And the fact that he goes down and then Nick Watson gets so heavily involved because no one else structurally can run with him was a big deciding factor in the fact that this game was drawn in the first place. Darcy Cameron ends up injuring his ankle, and he did come off a few times late in the piece, so it's going to be interesting to see anything that happens with that. And Steel Sidebottom had his hand stomped on during the game, all accidental of course, nothing below board. He should be okay. There's been no reports of any break or fractures, so he should be good to go. James Sicily for Hawthorn also did an ankle injury, which saw a very precarious position go down, because I do believe Hawthorn were down to only very limited rotations and they kept sending him out and he was very undercooked. So the fact that he was able to go out there and still play some type of role, I've got to take my hat off to him. He's very much one of those players that had a very negative kind of connotation linked to his name because of some of the questionable shit he did, but he's one of those players that since getting that leadership role at Hawthorn, that captaincy role, has really turned shit around. And while we can still see the old Sicily creep through at times, it's just good to see him rein it in and just want to get out there and lead his boys, even if it's to his own physical detriment. Huge outcome as well, just under 77,000 on a Thursday night at the MCG. Always good to see big numbers turn out. But looking at the team stats, this is where the game gets interesting, because we've had games this year where the scoreboard has been absolutely blown out of proportion, but teams statistically have been a lot closer than what the scoreboard alludes to. However, this isn't one of those cases. In fact, it's actually the reverse. Hawthorn dominated so many stats in this game that it's very questionable as to how they didn't win this game by 6, 7 or 8 goals. It was an absolute masterclass from Hawthorn. This is a team that was able to negate Nick Dacos, and Nick Dacos has actually had a down couple of weeks. While he's had 30 plus and he's still racking the numbers up, his efficiency has been so poor. I think, and we'll talk about it shortly, but he had close enough to, I think he had over 35 disposals in this game, close enough to it, and ran at 50% efficiency, which was the second lowest efficiency on the ground. But yet we still have a media focus on talking about how good he is and kind of overlooking that efficiency. Now, don't get me wrong, Nick Dacos is a generational player. He is absolutely sensational. He will consistently, throughout his career, always be within the best 5 players in the competition at any given time. But the fact that we sleep on stats like disposal efficiency and overglaze a little bit, I think is something we need to rein in just a little bit more. But breaking down the team stats, as I said, as a team, Collingwood had 345 disposals for the game. Hawthorn had 420. Blazer. But to have over, 80 odd disposals more, that's where I say Collingwood had quality for the quantity. They had less of the ball, but they were able to utilize it forward half a lot better. And again, a team outing for Collingwood here. They should have been decimated, and the stats reflect it, but the fact that they were able to hang on and maintain the leads for as long as they did, I commend them. But then for Hawthorn, you look, it's such a very precarious way when it comes to a draw, especially when stats are so one-sided, because it's easy to say Collingwood did great because they had less of the ball, but then it's so easy as well to say, oh, Hawthorn should have absolutely smashed them. So you get left in an area that is so full of grey that you don't know whether you should be lauding one performance and shutting down another. It's just brings up discussion points, obviously, as to whether or not draws should have extra time played, golden goal, whatever the case may be. I would love to know your thoughts. Let's talk about it in the comments down below. But again, Hawthorn had 420 disposals. They had 36 more free kicks. They had 36 more kicks. As for the handball game, they had 39 more. Inside 50s, they almost had double. 62 played 34. They were up on their average Hawthorn have been averaging 57.1 inside 50s and got 62. Collingwood have been averaging 51.1 and only got 34. So they very much under-delivered in their inside 50s, but to still deliver 15 goals 3 from 34 inside 50s and striking at 55.9% had them placed by over 11% on their season average. For Hawthorn, they had 62 inside 50s. They kicked 13-15. So you have a look at that and you say, okay, from their 62, they had 28 scoring shots, which is, okay, under half, and it equates to that. They ran at 48.4% efficiency inside 50, which is down by 8% on their season average. So again, Collingwood, for the little ball they had comparatively to Hawthorn, did a lot better with it. But this, I think, speaks more volume about Hawthorn, their inability to strike, to shut down. Could this be something that hangs over them going into September and stops them from taking that next step forward? Remains to be seen. Let's see how they bounce back this coming week. Around the stoppage, they got absolutely monstered in the ruck, which blows my mind, because I thought Darcy Cameron would have gotten the better of them in the centre clearance especially, but 41-22 hitouts. Hawthorn won the clearance battle by 16, of which they dominated the centre clearance by 14 in its own right. Contested possessions, they had 29 more. They had 60 more uncontested ball, which is where the shutdown happened. Being able to just shift the ball as freely as they wanted to really should have put the nail in the coffin early against Hawthorn, especially with some of the inaccuracy and players that failed to fire forward half of the ball Hawthorn had. They took 9 marks more around the ground, and obviously despite having 45 tackles, they had so many more disposals, but still only laid 8 tackles less. I think that's very impressive given the gap in that disposal differentiation when it comes down to things. Looking at the individual players, as I said, this is where we can turn attention to what I was saying about Nick Dacos. Now, he, from a fantasy point of view, was the highest rated player on the field, but you have a look at his disposal efficiency. As I said, he had 34 disposals. He ran at 50%. So to have, of your 34, only 17 of those being effective is rather alarming in my eyes anyway. He did still a lot around the ground, but when you heavily rely on a player like Nick Dacos to shoulder the burden of that midfield on his own, especially with the likes of Scott Pendlebury out, side bottom wasn't firing at 100%, it's hard to get off the chain with your best player failing to fire, which is where I feel Collingwood do need to be applauded, because Nick Dacos was firing at 50% for the game, but Collingwood was still finding a way to maintain leads and put scores on the board without Dacos really being too impactful. We break down from an individual point of view all the blemishes that we had for Hawthorn that could have been different. I mean, Weddle takes 2 marks inside 50, he kicks 2 behinds. Jai Newcomb kicks 2 behinds. Mitch Lewis could have kicked 4, he kicks 2 behinds. Reeves misses a shot on goal. Finn McGuinness misses a shot on goal. The big play I feel out of this game was the fact of being able to shut down Jack Gunston. Jack Gunston has been on fire all season. He is a Coleman medal favourite. He would be looking at potentially at this point of the season being close enough to a lock in the forward line as a bigger key forward for All Australian. Only kicks 1 behind for the game. And that is huge to be able to shut down a player of his calibre when you're missing a player like Jeremy Howe defensively. Josh Battle kicked a behind, but he's a defender, so you don't hold that against him. Massimo D'Ambrosio kicks a behind. So there were moments in this game where multiple players from Hawthorn could have and should have fired, and unfortunately didn't. A player I do want to highlight as well, in a negative light, is Darcy Moore. Now, he's led Collingwood as best as he possibly can, and I'm not doing this to diminish him as a person, but there were 4 acts in this game that I feel he did that cost Collingwood a win. and you can feel free to argue this as much as you'd like. Obviously, the main one is the dropped mark late in the game and then taking Dylan Moore head high for Dylan Moore to kick that goal to tie the game on the siren. But there were 3 other instances defensively where Darcy Moore spoiled or took the ball away from Darcy Cameron when Darcy Cameron had it wrapped up. And to see a player coming across his own teammate and spoiling a ball away from a guaranteed mark, or forcing a fumble because you've collided with your player instead of letting them take the mark, ended up resulting in a couple of shots at goal, one of which saw Nick Watson break away from a pack and kick a goal to keep them in the game. So there are instances where I feel Darcy Moore's influence was negatively shown and reflected on the game that caused Hawthorn to be closer in this contest than they should have been. There's 2 goals directly that could have and should have been taken away. I think one of the spoils ended up resulting in Jai Newcomb scoring a goal as well. So directly from Moore's own hand, Hawthorn kicked 3 goals and they managed to tie the game in a game where Collingwood on the scoreboard on their own terms should have won. But then again, we sit here in reflection and look at the scores and we look at the inside 50s and then we question, well, we can say Collingwood should have won, but then in retrospect, Hawthorn should have won. It's such a conundrum, and I'm not going to try to dwell on it because I don't want to hurt my head any more than it's already hurting trying to discuss this. So we'll get into the votes for the game. And this was hard because, again, Nick Dacos comes out and has his 34, and some people regard that as a game worthy of being voted for. But then when you break it down, as I just did, 50% efficiency, so he only runs with, efficiently 17 of those disposals. It's hard to calculate votes for him as much as I love him as a neutral supporter. But I did land on these 3, and I think collectively, when we look at the impact each of these players had on the game, hard to look past who to vote for. You could probably argue the 2 vote and the 3 vote can be swapped, and some people will probably argue that, but this is how I've landed. I'm giving 1 vote to Dan Houston. I thought on the night he was Collingwood's best player. 32 disposals, 5 were contested, 7 marks, 3 tackles, 1 clearance, 698 metres gained, 1 goal assist, and 5 score involvements. The 2 vote I gave to Connor McDonald, and I know some people would probably argue he was best on ground for his influence. He had 28 disposals, 11 of which were contested, 7 marks, 1 tackle, 4 clearances, 370 metres gained, 3 goals, 1 goal assist, and 9 score involvements. But I landed on Jai Newcomb for best on ground for the 3 votes. He, at some contest, lined up directly against Nick Dacos and was able to negate him in his own way, while still being able to accumulate 27 possessions of his own, 10 of which were contested, 4 marks, 5 tackles, 8 clearances, 363 metres gained, 1 goal, and 11 score involvements. I just thought around the contest, he was one of, if not the most influential players to break away from centre clearance and set Hawthorn up with first use. And ultimately, in a drawn game, when you look at the likes of the midfielders that Collingwood had in, for Jai Newcomb to really stand as tall as he did was absolutely great. And I would probably go as far to say as well, when it comes to the Brownlow this year, wouldn't be surprised if Jai Newcomb at this point in the season was a smoky to be up the leaderboard a hell of a lot more than what some people would give credit for. This is going to be interesting because moving forward, we know Collingwood are managing Scott Pendlebury's load to ensure that he gets to his milestone-breaking game at a particular point in the season. But in reflection, a game like this could have probably had Collingwood in better stead if Scott Pendlebury did play. So, are they putting Person before the team? And I know some people are questioning whether they should be, and I think that is a fair assumption and conversation to have. Hawthorn, on the other hand, again, as I alluded to earlier in the piece, so inaccurate in front of goal, some players failing to fire. Is this going to be an occurrence that costs them late in the season during the home and away season, but more importantly, come finals time? We know that they're a momentum riding team. We know that they have as much aura as any other team in the competition, but if they fail to convert as badly as they did in this game? Could they be writing themselves out before the finals campaign truly even gets underway? Remains to be seen. Both teams, however, coming out of this with the first draw, and I think moving forward, they'll take the 2 points happily, and it'll be a great reflection to see where both of these teams head from this point. Friday night saw another doubleheader go down, and this is absolutely killing football, in my personal opinion. You can feel free to disagree, but we have had now back-to-back weeks where a great rivalry is to be seen and played out on screen, and we've had to share that experience with another game going at the same time and overlapping. It just absolutely kills hype for certain games, and we know that some people, especially neutrals, are more inclined to watch a showdown, to watch like the Battle of the Bridge, the Q Clash, the Western Derby. Those type of games are going to draw more eyes just purely based on rivalry alone. But then you get some games on the same slot that have so much to play out in way of, you know, teams and their respective seasons. It's just so hard, and it's so stupid. And again, this is something that could be avoided if we scrapped round 0, because there would be no need for those early buys. There would then be no need to double book on Friday nights. This is an absolute fumble by the AFL, but hey, as I've said numerous times again, the AFL will continue to be a circus while clowns are the fucking people running it. But the first of 2 on Friday night saw the Bulldogs hosting Fremantle at Marvel Stadium. The Bulldogs obviously rifled with injury, not to the extent of losing, you know, a huge number of players, but just the caliber of the players that they are missing. Tom Liberatore in that midfield is absolutely huge, and the role he plays, I feel, is very understated. Ed Richards carrying injury. Norton still in the team, but carrying injury that could be affecting output. No Sam Darcy, no Rory Lobb in defence. This is a team that is not firing at all cylinders from that elite top tier point of view. And I've said it previously and I'll rehash it again. The issue with the Bulldogs has always been underneath that A grade tier, that elite tier of players they have, the gap between the next best is a little bit too and far between, and you don't have players readily available at the caliber of players that are missing to fill that gap. And I think that's where Bulldogs are going to struggle a little bit. When it comes a time that the Bulldogs are going to have no Bontempelli, no Norton, and those other players that are still carrying through this team, but they've got injury, Bulldogs are going to drop off in a very big way. But you can never write the Bulldogs off when Marcus Bontempelli is still playing, because even on one leg carrying this apparent knee injury that he's got, he still fires on all cylinders, and he is good enough to drag you over the line. That is why, in my personal opinion, Marcus Bontempelli is still the best player in the AFL, just purely based on that skill and ability. But it was Fremantle winning by 12 points in a very close contest, and this was again another game where the Bulldogs got a very early jump, but you could just tell that the personnel that were missing would allow for opposition to creep back into the game. We saw it against Sydney the week prior, and it played out exactly the same here against Fremantle. At quarter time, Bulldogs led 6-3-39 to 2-1-13. At half time, it was 9-6-60, leading 7-4-46. At three-quarter time, very late in the piece, Fremantle were able to come back and lead 12-7-79 to 11-9-75, and the final scoreline saw Fremantle 17-12-114 defeat the Bulldogs 15-12-102. Very, very great game of football, I felt. You just felt that Bulldogs had put the queue in the rack a little bit and opened up opportunity for Fremantle to come out and score as heavily as they did. And unfortunately, they weren't able to stop the momentum. Once Fremantle started to get that momentum rolling, they were very hard to stop, and they're a very dangerous looking team this year. I am actually suggesting at this point in time, after watching 8 rounds of football play out, the grand final this year, in my opinion, will end up being Sydney versus Fremantle. And I tipped Brisbane to go for a three-peat. So anything can happen from this point. But just on the brand of football we're seeing and how explosive Fremantle have been able to be, I genuinely think they are a premiership threat this year. And they've been a dark horse of mine for many seasons, but they're finally making things click. But anything can happen. There's still a lot of football to go down. Latham Vandermeer for the Bulldogs ended up doing a hamstring, so impacting that injury list a little bit more. He's not one of those A-grade players that I'm talking about, but he's a role player. He fills a void, he fills a niche, and with him gone at the point that he was gone, because he was a bit influential forward half of the ball, yeah, not good for the Dogs at all. But at least they're starting to get some men back. They had English come back in this week, so they were able to stem the gap around the contest. I felt just a little bit more, but I was so rudely mistaken. I thought English coming back in would keep Luke Jackson more accountable, but just wait for the statistical breakdown. The Bulldogs actually had 18 more disposals around the contest. It was a very close game. They had 2 less kicks, but they had 20 more handballs. Inside 50s was almost evenly matched. 11 more inside 50s to the way of Fremantle. So the fact that they had 11 more, but they only won by 12 points, Bulldogs backline should hold themselves in a little bit more of a positive light, given the fact that they're missing some players in that defensive lineup. They're playing a lot of young kids defensively out of that back half. So to hold up as well as they did, I thought they did incredibly well. The Bulldogs had 52 inside 50s, which is just up on their average of 51. And obviously 63 to Fremantle, which is very much up on their average from 54. Efficiency inside 50, the Bulldogs ran at 50% dead even, Fremantle running at 47%. So again, this is a game where 12 points was the outcome, but Fremantle could have and should have won by a much bigger margin, and puts them kind of in the same pocket as Hawthorn. Often enough, we find Fremantle being a little bit more blasé in front of goal, and they have opportunities go begging more often than not. Jai Amos can be firing one week, but then the next week he's just missing shots on goal. We know Shea Bolton on the fly loves to get a kick around the corner, but he'll more often than not spray the goal a little bit. So it's hard to get a gauge on them forward half of the ball, but still collectively around the contest, Fremantle looks so exciting. They're moving it with speed. They're very hard to match when it comes to that. And the bigger point for Fremantle here is the opposite of the Bulldogs. I mentioned that underneath that A-tier player list that the Bulldogs have, where is the next best coming from? With Fremantle, Andrew Brayshaw and Caleb Sarong for years have been their most 2 important players, especially when it comes to the midfield. Both those players, in my mind anyway, have failed to fire all year this year. And yet we've had players from that second tier down step up and fill the void. Shea Bolton has been absolutely sensational. He would have to be in All-Australian contention. Luke Jackson, as a solo ruck, has been absolutely brilliant. Hayden Young comes back in, and he's looking fit and firing. Jordan Clark off of half back. You've got Luke Ryan, who couldn't get a game at the start of the year in this lineup, just looking so comfortable at home. Alex Pearce in his lockdown role. There is so much to love about what Fremantle's doing. Free kick count, we won't talk about it too much, but 27-17, the way of the Bulldogs. Are we surprised? I mean, the Bulldogs more often than not find a way to get the better rub of the green. They've got a much better average this year. Their average is 20 free kicks. Fremantle only averaging 16. So Fremantle not getting many looks when it comes to free kicks whatsoever this season, but they're still finding ways to do without. Now, I mentioned Tim English coming back in for this game, and I thought the ruck contest would at least break even, because Tim English is a great ruckman. The new ruck rules suit his style, but he was absolutely dominated in the ruck. 61 hitouts to 23. That's a huge discrepancy, especially when the Bulldogs have been averaging 30 hitouts, and they're down on that average. Fremantle's only been averaging 45, and they managed to pile on another 16. Like, what? That's absolutely insane to me. And even with that close enough to 40 hit-out gap, Fremantle only won the clearance game by 8 clearances around the contest. 2 in the way of the centre clearance, and 6 in the way of stoppage clearance. This is why I say Bontempelli is so critical to the contest, and we'll talk about his individual performance momentarily. But to have so many hit-outs go against you, you would think that the Fremantle midfield would have absolutely destroyed the Bulldogs midfield, but Bulldogs just find a way to stay in the contest and grit their teeth and just... It was a very inspiring... I don't want to say inspiring loss, because I don't buy into that shit, but it was an inspiring performance from a team that had their backs up against the wall coming into this game, despite home ground advantage, if you want to look at it that way. Overall, with disposal as well, as I said, Bulldogs in the contest only lost the clearance by a little bit, but they had more disposal, and it was only marginable. They only had 18 more disposals around the ground, so nothing to write home about. There was only 6 marks between the two of them. This is where I think the game was truly won for Fremantle, and it was their defensive efforts and their pressure. They laid 20 more tackles for the game. Bulldogs managing to lay 58, but Fremantle laying 78, which is 16 more tackles upon their seasonal average. They just went to a new gear. In that second half, when Fremantle started to wrestle momentum back in, started hitting the scoreboard, and they had the Bulldogs frazzled a little bit, the pressure around that contest just went to a whole new level. Just tackles were coming left, right, and centre, and the Bulldogs were just fumbling the ball around. They were starting to get themselves in position where they started to handball a little bit more than they should have. They were turning the ball over a little bit easier. It was a great performance by Fremantle, and they needed a performance like this, I feel, to really solidify that belief within themselves. To be able to get a win on the road against a team who, although have their injuries, is still within that top 10 to 8 configuration this year, is big, is huge. You can't understate that at all. As I mentioned, talking about the players that I feel should be mentioned in this game, there were efforts that you can't look past. The clearance game, as I said, despite the dominance from the ruckman from Fremantle, especially from Luke Jackson himself, like they had what I mentioned they had as a team 61 hitouts. When we look at the hitout count of that 61, Luke Jackson had 36. Mason Cox teamed up with him to get the other 25. The clearance game, though, Matt Kennedy has a game-high 9 clearances. Ed Richards, although he's been injured and hampered by injury, manages 7. Fraser manages 6. It was great to see a little bit of configuration in the way of roving to opposition ruckmen, and that's going to happen more often than not with the new ruck rules, and we've seen that over recent weeks. But for them to still get a little bit of ascendancy out of that midfield group, despite the clear advantage that, or the disadvantage rather, that they had in that ruck contest, I commend them very much so. Speaking about the 3 that I voted for, though, it was hard to look past the efforts of Marcus Bontempelli for 1 vote. 33 disposals, 7 of which were contested, 4 marks, 2 tackles, 6 clearances, 630 metres gained, 2 goals, 2 goal assists, and 9 score involvements. The 2 vote I gave to Luke Jackson could very well have been best on, but we're going to talk about who gets best on momentarily. He had 18 disposals, 12 of which were contested, 3 marks, 8 tackles, 36 hitouts, 3 clearances, 295 metres gained, 1 goal, and 13 score involvements. And if there's any truth to be believed that he wants to come back to Victoria, every single Victorian team would be absolutely fucking crazy not to want to throw the kitchen sink at this guy to land him at their club. But I think now, with the success that Fremantle's starting to build, Jackson would be a fucking idiot to want to walk away from that, to put it lightly. Best on ground, though, I'm giving to Shea Bolton. 30 disposals, 15 were contested, 2 marks, 3 tackles, 9 clearances, 497 metres gained, 1 goal, 2 goal assists, and a game-high 16 score involvements. Conversation all week has now been about who won the trade between Fremantle and Richmond. Shea Bolton goes to Fremantle. Fremantle ended up coughing up 3 draft picks, of which we landed Taj Houghton, we landed Jonty Fall, and we got somebody else tied to us as well. Luke Traynor, I think, might have been the other player. and we passed on, obviously, on Murphy Reid in that trade, and I was one that wanted Murphy Reid during that trade period. I think it's hard at this point in time to determine who has won the trade, because of the 3 young kids that Richmond get out of that draft pool, Taj Houghton was touted as a #1 draft pick before he did his ACL. Jonty Fall probably taken a little bit earlier in the key forward kind of realm, but has possibility to end up being one of the better key forwards later in his life, although he struggled a little bit earlier this year. And Luke Trainer's been finding it hard to get into this team through injury, through relegation. Whereas with Shea Bolton, immediately you can say, yes, Fremantle have won the trade because Murphy Reid is fantastic and Shea Bolton's been a genuine game changer for Fremantle. But if Fremantle don't get a premiership out of it, did they win the trade? You know, versus if those 3 kids that Richmond drafted play a pivotal role in turning Richmond's rebuild around, who wins that trade? Maybe I'm talking shit, I don't know. But Shea Bolton has been firing, as much as it pains me. I still feel he lacks a defensive side to his game. He is very offensively sound, but when the ball's on the other end, you more often than not see him, you know, pulling out of a contest to try to get the rebound work and try to get the ball to him, as opposed to being one actively trying to force that turnover through a tackle or a pressure act. That's just my opinion. But Fremantle were absolutely sensational in this game. The Bulldogs, all credit to them, were able to hang into the contest as much as they did, but to put on that gap that they did early and then fade away could start ringing some alarm bells a little bit, enough to suggest that maybe come the pointier end of the season, they're going to struggle a little bit unless they can find continuity with the players they have available, and they'd want to start getting some of those injured players fit and firing for the back end of the season, because they could miss that top 8 altogether. The other game on Friday night, and this is why I highlighted the bullshit of this fixturing and the double fixturing and the double headers, was the showdown. Adelaide, Port Adelaide, Adelaide Oval. And in my opinion, the greatest rivalry in football to date. When it comes to, as a neutral supporter, all the different rivalries around the country that we get, the Western Derby between Fremantle and West Coast, Battle of the Bridge, Sydney and GWS, the Q Clash. I don't want to be saying Clue Clash because that might trigger some people. The Q Clash between Brisbane and Gold Coast, and the showdown with Adelaide and Port Adelaide. I think as a neutral, and from a neutral standpoint, the showdown is always an absolute thriller, especially when it comes down to less than a kick like this game did. This was a game where Port Adelaide hit the front, and in the dying moments, Adelaide say, nope, hold my beer, there's another gear to go to in this game. Fuck, it was great. It was really good. And it's a damn shame that, you know, people that want to take in every single game over the course of the weekend couldn't watch this game in full because the other fucking Friday night game was going down. That's what I'm trying to get at. Despite an early hamstring injury to Tex Walker, and now revealed a groin injury, I believe, to Jordan Butts defensively, Adelaide still found a way to walk away with a very close win here. At quarter time, Port Adelaide led 3-2-20 to 1-2-8. At halftime, Port Adelaide led 4-4-28 to 3-4-22. Very low scoring, but in the second half, something happened and gears just started to turn. Adelaide found a way to hit the front by three-quarter time, 8-9-57 leading 7-7-49, and the final scoreline saw Adelaide win 11-10-76 to 11-9-75. One singular point, and it came down to 2 players. Late in the piece, barely any time left on the clock, I think it was Berry from Port Adelaide who manages to break away from a centre clearance inside forward 50, kicks a goal, puts them up by 5. And you think the game is done and dusted at that point, especially given prior to that, Wayne Miller takes a shot from on the 50 for Adelaide, puts it through, but the umpire comes out and pays a free kick against Josh Rochelle for a push on the goal line. I thought it was going to come down to an umpire decision costing Adelaide again, and obviously to have that goal reversed, Port Adelaide got the other end and kicked that goal, you think that they've been absolutely robbed out of this game. But very late, with only seconds left on the clock, Miller wins the ball at half forward, gets a handball out while being tackled. The ball gets fed to young Braden Cook, who from 50 slots it through and gets them the win. As a young kid, boy, you would be on cloud 9 having kicked that goal to win the derby, or the showdown, sorry, for your team. I was going to call it a derby. It's not a derby, it's a showdown. Make sure of that. But Cook to just go back and have the composure to put the goal through with the game on the line was absolutely huge. And it was just, again, another contest with these two clubs that you knew you were going to get a great game out of. It's always, irregardless of where these teams are on the ladder, they always go balls to the wall when it comes to the showdown. Moving forward, how is Adelaide going to operate without Tex Walker in that forward half, without Jordan Butts for a couple of weeks defensively, especially given the fact that they're already missing Mitchell Hinge, they're already missing Mark Keane. They now lose Jordan Butts. That now means Josh Worrell needs to be more accountable in his role, but now structurally throws a little bit of things out of whack, because now they don't have a floating player through to be that intercept defender. They now have to play more lockdown instead of that intercepting role. So moving forward, going to be interesting to see just in the short term how they operate. And coming up against Richmond, they should win that game, but we've seen some weirder shit go down. Breaking down the team stats, Port Adelaide only had a little bit more of the ball comparatively to Adelaide. Adelaide had 339 disposals, which is down on their average only just slightly, and Port Adelaide had 356. Inside 50s, it came down to a 1 point game, but Adelaide had 20 more inside 50s. That is huge. For a season average, both of them are averaging over 51 inside 50s per game. Adelaide struck at 59, Port Adelaide only went at 39, which is down on that 51% by quite a margin. So again, all that entry inside 50, but Tex Walker commanding that presence now out of the game. Structurally, you need to move pieces around, and then that throws your forward dynamic a little bit out of whack. You know, Riley Thilthorpe, if he wasn't already getting that number 1 defender, he is now guaranteed to be getting that number 1 defender. But now that secondary defender plays on somebody that's a step lower than Tex Walker, or is now able to play that loose intercepting, third man up. And that is what, for a long period of this game, was very much happening. It was allowing players like Alir to come through and intercept a bit better. They were able to get first hands on the ball defensively. They worked really well as a unit, that back half, but Cook just putting the dagger in the heart. Inside 50 efficiency, Adelaide only ran at 39%, 10% down on their seasonal average, and Port Adelaide striking pretty much on par with their average as well. The hit-out contest was won by Port Adelaide, 38-55, but the clearance game, again, was even spread. Collectively around the ground, Port Adelaide only had 3 more clearances for the game, which you need to take into consideration here. Another game that Jordan Dawson doesn't play in, so you're missing leadership, you're missing somebody who loves winning contested ball, gets plenty of uncontested ball on the outside as well, and is a real figurehead in moving that ball for Adelaide. And they were still able to get the job done without him. I thought was absolutely great, because I thought without Dawson, the midfield of Port Adelaide might have been a little bit too much. Zach Butters, Horn Francis, these types of players could have stepped up a gear, but it just wasn't meant to be, unfortunately. Around the contest, marking wise, there was almost 20, 30 marks more actually to Port Adelaide, just shy of. Adelaide had 12 more tackles around the contest, which was almost done by, or actually it was done by one player. The gap in tackles was led by one player alone, and Sam Berry walked out of this game as the showdown medalist. And just wait till I talk about the input he's had. He, again, is a player that doesn't get spoken about near enough with the role he plays, because normally it's just he's just a role player. He gets plenty of the ball, but he doesn't outshine people usually. And this is a game where he really just stamped authority on it off of his own boot, off of his own hand. He was absolutely incredible. That's not to discredit anybody else, because there were so many players in this game that did stand tall. But again, when looking at influence, disposal efficiency kind of let a few players down. I thought Zach Butters, even though he had 30, wasn't his best game. Bergman has a game where he did well defensively. I mean, he takes 11 marks and rebounds great off of that half-back line, but outside of that, doesn't really do much to offer the team at all. Jordan Sweet, I thought, did well to get 36 hitouts on his own accord against McAndrew, and then I thought McAndrew did well enough in his own right to stamp his authority. But the three I've landed on, I think ultimately were the three best on, and the 2 and the 3 I know very much are in that conversation, just going off of the showdown medal votes. But I gave 1 vote to Ollie Wines. I thought on the night he was Port Adelaide's best. He had 30 disposals, 18 of which were contested, 6 marks, 7 tackles, 7 clearances, 248 metres gained, 1 goal assist, and 7 score involvements. The 2 vote I gave to Wayne Malira. I thought he was sensational, and he's having a really good year this year. 29 disposals, 11 of which were contested, 6 marks, 4 tackles, 3 clearances, 389 metres gained, and 4 score involvements. And best on, as I mentioned, was Sam Berry. 29 disposals, 7 of which were contested, 3 marks, 19 tackles this guy laid, and I will talk about that discrepancy momentarily. 5 clearances, 704 metres gained, and 2 score involvements. He had 19 tackles. The next best following that was Ollie Wines with 7. He had 12 more tackles than anybody on the ground, so that discrepancy in tackles was off of his own hand alone. He was an absolute monster in this game. If you had the ball and you were wearing a Port Adelaide jumper, you were at the behest of this man absolutely riding you into the ground, and I'm not talking about the good way either. Great game of football. Absolutely fantastic. From one team that should be within that top 10 configuration in Adelaide, and from Port Adelaide, who over recent weeks has been touted as a bottom 4 team, but finding ways in recent weeks to stand tall. They knock off Geelong 2 weeks ago, and then they just fall to Adelaide by 1 point in the showdown here. This is a Port Adelaide team who I think has room to grow and can cause upset moving forward. With Adelaide, it's about maintaining continuity while losing some very important players. Again, Tex Walker out of that forward line structurally, I think hurts them a bit. Jordan Butts out potentially hurts them defensively, structurally. So they should very much still pick up a win this week against Richmond. But hey, if Richmond want to stand up tall and pick up their second win of the season, I wouldn't be fucking complaining about it. But what a game from these two teams. The first game on Saturday, and I mean no disrespect to Essendon fans when I say this, but we're going to be able to glance over this game quite quickly in review because it was an absolute whitewash. Essendon hosted Brisbane at Marvel Stadium. It was Brisbane by the tune of 64 points, and the biggest talking point out of this game is the leaked photo of a whiteboard in Brisbane's, locker room where every Essendon player was written down on there with strengths and weaknesses listed. And players like Ben Mackay had no strengths listed at all. Jackson Pryor's strength was his partner's name written down, essentially saying, he's batting above his weight. Zach Merritt was listed as being selfish. Players were listed as having no confidence. And it's been beat up and blown up quite a bit. Now, Jackson Pryor, let's not forget, is an ex-Brisbane player. And he has even come out since this saying that the joke around Brisbane when he was there was that he was batting above his weight, and he understands that, and he says that himself. So he takes no disrespect out of that. But you've got Carolyn Wilson and all these other media journalists saying, Essendon should be furious and it's not a good look. But Chris Fagan hit the nail on the head post-game. He said, we've been doing this strategy for 9 years, and you've gotten sustained success from Brisbane, turning around what was a very dire kind of part in their club history to get back to success again. And every club in reflection would be listing strengths and weaknesses for every player when it comes to game day analysis and breaking down how to best a player on the field. So I think more so we should be looking at I think it was leaked by an Auskicker parent, I believe, was down there, saw the board, took a photo and posted it online. So do with that information as you will. But again, 64 points the way of Brisbane, and it was dead at quarter time. Let's be real. 6-2-38 led 1-3-9. Half time, 10-5-65 led 4-8-32. 3-quarter time, 17-8, 110, led 5-11, 41, and the final score line 22-11, 143, defeated Essendon 11-13, 79. That second half, Essendon managed to scrape together 7 goals. Brisbane went on to kick 12, and it could have been a lot bigger given the fact that they missed 6 shots on goal late as well. Brisbane just getting momentum back on their side after a rocky start and getting to pick up wins like this away from the Gabba just keeps building that confidence and that self-belief. I still feel they are very much a big chance to go with the three-peat this year, back to back to back, especially when they're starting to find a lot of continuity in their game. Jai Caldwell ended up with an ankle injury out of this game, and Al Hawley ended up with a collarbone injury, so more injuries mounting for Essendon, which is a bit unfortunate, and Ty Gallop for Brisbane ended up in concussion protocol, so he will miss this coming weekend. Breaking down the team statistics, I think when you look at the discrepancy on the scoreboard, I think it is going to be one of those outcomes where the stats speak volumes, and it very much is. 350 disposals for Essendon, playing Brisbane's 414. The kicking game is where it was at. I mean, Essendon had 168 handballs to 129, but Brisbane had 285 kicks to 182. They had more than 100 more kicks around the ground, and I think that should reflect in the marking count being absolutely blown out of proportion as well. Both teams were very efficient with ball. I mean, Essendon still ran at 73% efficiency, Brisbane at 76. Inside 50s were actually rather close given this discrepancy. Essendon had 53 inside 50s to Brisbane 65, but it was just that failure to do anything with the ball when you get into that defensive half. And fair enough to Essendon, if you're not hitting targets in a defensive line against Brisbane, they're going to swallow the ball 9 times out of 10. And that's why I still highly regard Brisbane as one of the best defensive teams in the competition. Contested possessions was only just marginally won by Brisbane, but they had pretty much 40 more disposals uncontested. They actually turned the ball over 2 more times than Essendon did. So Brisbane had plenty more of the ball and turned it over more, but just weren't punished on that turnover. It's just that failure to deliver. And as I said, the marking game here is huge. They have 100 more kicks around the ground, and the discrepancy with the marks here, Essendon had 78 marks for the game. Brisbane had 163. It was as effective as a meme of portraying a team as witches' hats or training cones as you could exemplify, I feel. And again, that's not to knock Essendon fans. I just think they're very much in a position here, Essendon, where they need to look inward, I feel, and really start to make some hard decisions. Now, one of my closest friends is an Essendon supporter, and him and I talk shit back and forth about, you know, Essendon and Richmond respectively each and every week, each and every round. And he's even turned around and said there are a bulk of players he would be delisting or looking at trading at the end of the year. He firmly believes that Brad Scott should be axed as coach and they should bring somebody else in, especially while Adam Simpson, John Longmire is still available, still available, while Ken Hinkley is still available. Trying to get somebody else in externally to change things and move things around, because this wasn't a good look at all. This was very poor. This was as demoralizing as you can get. I think this is further impacting as well when players like Nate Caddy are interviewed post-game, and he comes out with comments that, if you read between the lines, almost suggest that he is very unhappy being at Essendon. He I feel could be very much one to walk when it comes to Tasmania coming into the system. It's not good. We know Zach Merritt's going to be asking for another trade at the end of the year. I don't think he re-signs with Essendon. As I said, I've got mates and the wider AFL community think that Essendon need to be harsh when dropping the axe on some players as well. They've gone backwards quicker than going forwards, and you can talk about injury impacting and whatever the case may be, but this was very, very uninspiring. I mean, they kick 11-13, so they still kick a reputable score, but just the blowout and the proportion of the one-sidedness by disposal and just lack of effort around the contest is just everything that is rubbing Essendon supporters the wrong way. Breaking down the player stats, we can jump through this real quick. It's clearly going to be 3 players from Brisbane that I'm giving the votes to. Some might be a little bit stiff, but I think the 3 here collectively around the ground on the day were huge. Giving the 1 vote to Hugh McCluggage, 25 disposals, 12 of which were contested, 8 marks, 3 tackles, 9 clearances, 546 metres gained, 1 goal assist, and 11 score involvements. The 2 vote I'm giving to Zach Bailey, very highly touted player that's going to be heavily spoken about going into the trade period and free agency this year. 21 disposals, 8 were contested, 7 marks, 4 tackles, 3 clearances, 430 metres gained, 4 goals and 9 score involvements. And best on, I gave to Darcy Wilmot. I thought his game defensively was sensational. 32 disposals, 7 of which were contested, 12 marks, 1 tackle, 572 metres gained, 1 goal and 6 score involvements, and I'm pretty sure when you look at his disposal efficiency, it was huge. He ran at 87% disposal efficiency, and of the 32 disposals that he had 8 intercept possessions, he had some inside 50s as well. He was very influential out of that back line. As far as young kids go in the game, if I was to pick a player from every club to bring to Richmond, Darcy Wilmot would be on top of my list. He's absolutely incredible. Where to from here? Essendon do have some winning and winnable... Where to from here? Essendon do have winnable games coming up, but when they're playing like this, it is hard to decipher where their next win is going to come from. Brisbane, on the other hand, starting to build enough steam to suggest that top 4 could be a lock for them and they could still be the team to beat in the competition. Boy, am I going to love talking about this one because I didn't think the time would come, but West Coast hosted Richmond at Optus Stadium, which saw Richmond pick up their first win for the 2026 season by 11 points. And I'm so happy because not only did I tip Richmond to win and got a perfect 9 out of 9 tipping round, but I actually tipped them as my certainty for this past weekend. So I'm looking really good in that retrospect as well. This was as big of a win I feel Adam Uze has had since becoming Richmond coach, because this should have been an absolute dismantling on West Coast part. Away from the MCG at Optus Stadium, where West Coast have been playing some good footy, Richmond coming into this game with 16 on the injury list. We only had 3 AFL listed players playing in the VFL this week, and everybody else that was available came over to the trip. So we're starting to scrape the bottom of the barrel in that retrospect. And in the first 5 minutes of this game, Dion Prestia does a calf injury, so we were down 1 rotation on the bench, and given the fact that Taranto didn't play this game, we lost our most experienced midfielder from the midfield, and that is where some players from West Coast started to find some ascendancy through that middle part of the ground, and it was an arm wrestle for a good portion of this game. West Coast would pull ahead, Richmond would wrestle it back, Richmond would get ahead, West Coast would wrestle it back, and it did come down to the dying moments of this game for Richmond to ice it and walk away with the win. At quarter time, Richmond led 3-3-21 to 2-2-14. At halftime, Richmond led 8-4-52 to 6-6-42. Three-quarter time, Richmond led 10-7-67 to 9-9-63, and the final score line saw Richmond win 15-9-99 to 13-10-88. As I said, Prestia doing his calf was a very sour note on a very huge day for Richmond. This was great, and it's great to see that it was off the back of players that have stepped up out of necessity. Players like McAuliffe, Ross, Seth Campbell, Lynch still played a good role. Nick Vlosten got back to his best after having a very down year. Nathan Broad back to his best. It was great. Just to see everybody dig deep and have a fucking dip was so good. Around the ground, West Coast had 2 more disposals, 350 to 348. The handball game, West Coast had more. The kicking game, Richmond had more. Inside 50s, West Coast had 64. Richmond only had 48. So they had more inside 50s than we did, 16 more in fact. and just failed to deliver with their conversion, only running at a 39.1% inside 50 efficiency, down from their season average of 46. Richmond have been running at a season average of 43, but struck at 54. So it was great to see some big return in that retrospect and turning things around. A lot of people were talking about the umpiring in this game. A lot of people suggesting Richmond only won because of the umpiring. Now, I didn't realise the gap was this big, but it was 16 to 23, Richmond's favour. But when you have a look at it in isolation, in that gap, Harley Reid himself gave away 5 free kicks, which is normally good for a handful of those anyway. Just a little bit of ill-discipline. That's what puts the gap in games like this. People are questioning a 50-metre penalty that was paid. Essentially, I think it was Steely Green had a free kick about 60 metres out from goal. Player was called to stand. 3 West Coast players could have and didn't, and the 50 was paid. I think that is probably as clean cut as a 50 that we've had in recent weeks, given some that we have seen that have been paid that have been absolute howlers. If you're in a marking contest, I think the easiest way to do this is if there's a marking contest one-on-one and a player marks the ball, whoever's in that contest is the one to stand the mark. I think it's plainly obvious, but we've seen so many times a free kick paid against Melbourne where Max Gawn is the one in that infringement, but he's able to run down and take a mark down the field, but someone else stands the mark. I think there just needs to be more clarity on this rule, or even just scrap the rule. I can understand the rule coming from behind and cutting off angles, and that, fair enough. But yeah, 3 players called to stand, none of which did. Steely Green goes back at the time and kicks a goal to put Richmond 10 points up. I don't think umpires favoured this game, but that could be my Richmond bias. Given the run that Richmond have had, if we're getting the better rub of the green, I'd fucking just say, hey, hallelujah, about fucking time. Around the contest, the hitouts was quite even, 32 to 35. The clearance game, Eagles only won by 1, which I think was great for Richmond because clearance game hasn't been a strong suit for us in recent years. Contested possession, we won. Uncontested, they only had a bit more. Even marks around the contest, 90 to 95, the way of West Coast. Tackles for the game, 58 by West Coast, 49 by Richmond. It was a great contest. I think the biggest takeaway for me for this game wasn't just the fact that Richmond won. It was a good highlight to see 2 teams in similar circumstances see young kids stand tall and deliver. For West Coast, they had some obvious people stand tall. Elliot Yeo, Jake Waterman, Tim Kelly, Harley Reid in the first half at least. But again, for Richmond, as I said, I was just elated to see so many players stand tall and get involved, and I'll list some of the ones that I didn't vote for. We had Kane McAuliffe had 28 disposals. He had 4 tackles, 4 clearances. Tom Brown defensively took 10 marks and had 23 touches. Sam Cumming, in only his second game, had 23 disposals and laid 6 tackles. Trezise had 18 with 8 marks and 3 tackles. It was just great. It was great to see just a comprehensive team effort. The 3 players that I have landed on, I think definitely deserve to be spoken about. The 1 vote I gave to Tim Kelly. I personally thought Tim Kelly was West Coast best on the day. 30 disposals, 16 were contested, 3 marks, 2 tackles, 7 clearances, 474 metres gained, 1 goal assist, and 8 score involvements. The 2 vote I gave to Jack Ross, who has been the stand-in captain over the last 2 weeks, and I think both weeks back-to-back, he has led with an absolute fierceness that I didn't realise he had within him. 29 disposals, 19 were contested, 4 marks, 5 tackles, 11 clearances, 378 metres gained, and 3 score involvements. And best on ground, I'm happy to mention this guy's name in this vein. I'm giving it to Noah Bolter. He had a rough year last year, we all know why, but to see him come out and arguably have the best game he has played in recent years was huge. And he has just proven to everybody that supports Richmond that he might just very well be our most versatile player. He's gone from being a key defender, playing forward out of necessity, playing in the ruck, and he's grown into his own in recent weeks. And the word unicorn gets thrown around with players that get to have the ability to play each and every role and just fit it so well. Bolter could be Richmond's unicorn. I said it here first. But Bolter had 20 disposals, 18 of which were contested, 6 marks, 2 tackles, 20 hitouts, 6 clearances, 354 metres gained, 3 goals, and 7 score involvements. This really sets Richmond up well, because a undermanned Adelaide could see Richmond cause upset. We know Richmond have caused upset a bit around and with Adelaide before. Not at all suggesting they're going to, but there's realm for possibility. Richmond are due to cause an upset every now and again, but this belief, the way they played, was so inspiring to see, and that's going to build self-belief. And I feel there are still some games coming up this year that Richmond could really win. We play West Coast again, we play Carlton again, and we play Essendon. And I feel those 3 games are so winnable. Richmond could end up winning 4 to 5 games again this year. Given that they were touted to not win a game at all this year by many, could be a big turnaround for us, and this could be the turning point we needed. For West Coast, they have been slammed and dragged all week. You know, they lost to Richmond. Richmond had so many players out. I think unfairly they've been dragged, given the fact that they've put in some great efforts against some other teams. But I, again, have a good friend who's a West Coast supporter, and he is filthy on them. He is filthy. So it's hard from a neutral standpoint to say West Coast did well. There were some great things, but then to be told, no, they didn't. Well, maybe it's a little bit more dire for West Coast than what some people might believe and are willing to accept. The next game was at GMHBA Stadium with Geelong hosting North Melbourne, and I am left with more questions than answers out of this game, because I don't know whether the outcome reflects Geelong being the victors or something more dire for North Melbourne. I will talk about the match timeline, and I think then we'll kind of discuss it, because you'll get a better idea once we break the match timeline down, because up until 3/4 time, this was an absolute arm wrestle, and then was one of the most one-sided games of football I've seen in a quarter for a very long time. At quarter time, it was Geelong with a slight lead, 4-3-27, leading 3-2-20. At halftime, 5-6-36 from Geelong led 5-5-35 in North Melbourne. At 3/4 time, it was 12-7-79, leading 9-8-62. Might have ballooned out to a couple of goals, but it was still very manageable given the fact of how the momentum swings had gone for 3 quarters. But in the final term, North Melbourne kicked 4 goals straight. Geelong came out and managed to kick themselves 9 goals too. It was so one-sided to the point where I now am trying to decipher whether North Melbourne legitimately pushed Geelong for 3 quarters and then just dropped off, whether Geelong weren't putting their foot down and like wanting to run away with the game early. Is this a poor reflection on Geelong's start? Is this a poor reflection on North Melbourne's finish? I don't know where we sit here. I really don't, because for 3 quarters of football, this was an absolute arm wrestle, and I give North Melbourne so much credit for that. But then in the last term, for Geelong to run away with it, were they just taking the piss the entire time? Did North Melbourne truly fade? Does this present more problems for North Melbourne moving forward in the way of maybe not being that competitive beast that we considered they would be this year, given some of the outcomes they've had? I don't know. It's just, it poses too many questions in retrospect for my liking. I think we're kind of pulled and pushed in certain directions. No injuries out of this game, which is absolutely fantastic. Let's turn attention straight to the team statistics, given the disparagement of the scoreline by the end of the game. Given for 3 quarters, it was only a couple of goals one side that it ballooned out to, and then in the end it was just an absolute beatdown. And again, a game, as we touched on earlier in this video, where the scoreline doesn't reflect the outcome. Geelong only had 4 more disposals for the game. 4 more disposals. They had 10 more inside 50s, 60 to 50. Inside 50, however, both running rather poorly. Geelong only ran at 51% inside 50 efficiency, with North Melbourne running at 46%. Both ran at 76 and 74% respectively around the ground, but in a game only split by 10 inside 50s to win by 49 points is such a weird thing. This could have been and should have been much closer than what it was, given the way that the statistics have lined up. The stoppage battle, Geelong won the hitouts 40-28, but North Melbourne won the clearances 41-39. So again, a close contested game in the midfield, which I got to give again North Melbourne a lot of credit for, because Geelong have a great midfield set. Around the ground, both laid over 50 tackles for the game. Both laid some good tackles inside 50 as well, both laying 12. So forward half of the ground, they were both incredibly defensively sound. Around the contest, when it came to marking, Geelong only took 13 more marks for the game. And Geelong are one of those teams that likes to slow momentum down and take the sting out of the game. So to match that was great. So North Melbourne, to their credit here, were great around the contest, but it was just failure to hit the scoreboard where it counted. And to have such a close game statistically, but then blown out of proportion in the last quarter, I don't know whether you bring into the evaluation and the review of whether maybe the young kids from North Melbourne ran out of energy, they don't have big enough tanks yet, whether or not Geelong were in cruise control for 3 quarters and then they put the foot down through the likes of Max Holmes, Jeremy Cameron. I don't know. I really don't know. We know the brand of football both of these teams are capable of. North Melbourne have come out this year showing that they can be a wildcard contender at the very least, and Geelong just every year find a way, regardless of how their form is during the home and away season, they'll consistently find themselves in positions to finish in the top 5, top 4 teams in the competition every year. So do we just consider this last quarter fade out to be an anomaly? Do we look into it a bit deeper? I don't know. I really don't know. As I said, this was really confusing given how competitive a game it was for 3 quarters. For the votes, a little bit out of the ordinary considering they lost by a big margin, but I think justifiably when you see the stat line, you've got to really give the man his just desserts. The one vote I gave to Jeremy Cameron, 19 disposals, 4 were contested, 8 marks, 1 tackle, 1 clearance, 433 metres gained, 3 goals, 4 goal assists, and 12 score involvements. The 2 vote, Geelong's best on, I gave it to Max Holmes. He had 29 disposals, 9 of which were contested, 4 marks, 2 tackles, 4 clearances, 802 metres gained, 2 goals, 1 goal assist, and 6 score involvements, and best on ground, I gave to Tristan Xerri. These numbers as a huge ruckman is unbelievable. 30 disposals, 26 of which were contested, 1 mark, 7 tackles, 23 hitouts, 14 clearances, 386 metres gained, and 8 score involvements. To me, with how the Brownlow medal is apparently going to shift this year and years moving forward, with the umpires now being able to look at specific statistics post-game, players like Xerri are going to start to get more recognition. We could finally see a ruckman competitively push for a Brownlow. Brodie Grundy this year has been in some great form as well and would be taking a lot of votes up in some very big moments and big games. So for a ruckman to come out, especially Tristan Xerri dealing with the blood fiasco when they took on Essendon, has really come back in some good form and knows that he owes it to the club. And if he keeps running on the momentum that he's building up, could very well be in All-Australian contention this year. Again, I don't know where we look for the outcome of this game. We need to look outward and look at how they perform moving forward retrospectively. It's just weird that North would be so competitive for 3 quarters and then drop off, because we've seen better and more consistent performances from them over recent weeks. So I think we just notch this up to maybe just fading out of the game just a little bit. Geelong were more composed and have a little bit more experience around the contest, but this was a great game for 3 quarters at least. And if you're a North Melbourne fan, despite the outcome, I think you look at this and you take a lot of positives out of this game. Speaking of continuity, the final game on Saturday night saw Carlton taking on St Kilda at Marvel Stadium, and the tale of the tape this year has been the fade-outs in the second half from Carlton. It's a surer thing if you're ever going to bet on anything this year, and It happened again quite emphatically. The match timeline breaks it down perfectly. At quarter time, St Kilda led 3-3-21 to 2-4-16. At half time, Carlton led 7-7-49 to 5-7-37. At three-quarter time, St Kilda led 13-11 to 89 to 8-11-59, and the final scoreline was 16-12-108, defeating Carlton 9-15-69. They only managed to put on 20 points, Carlton, in a half of football, where St Kilda went on to kick themselves 11 goals 5. It poses a lot of questions, and I don't think Michael Voss will be coaching at the end of this year. I personally think they should cut ties with him now and stop the bleeding as soon as they can, especially with, again, we've touched on it already, Kingsley, Hinkley, Longmire, these names available to coach. Why don't they look outward already? There has been news that's dropped since the recording of this video that the whole Elijah Hollins fiasco, they're only being fined $75,000 as a club. No other repercussions. I'm not going to get into it because I don't want to be politically divisive when it comes to some things. I've got my own opinions based on personal experience, and we could deep dive that at another time and place, but to only be sanctioned $75,000 out of that is, to me, it comes across as a slap on the wrist. And they're incredibly lucky, but Carlton are in all sorts. To think, had Tom Lynch kicked straight in round 1, Carlton would be sitting on the bottom of the ladder with no wins. And they highlighted this on television last night, that with the new draft system that's going to be in place for father, son, and academy picks, is Carlton tanking to ensure that they don't only get their father, son selection and Cody Walker, but they force themselves to get an extra selection at the draft table. Now, for those of you playing at home, the draft process this year is if a club loses a position due to a successful bid for an academy player or a father's son, they are gifted a late first round selection. So, for example, currently Richmond are on the bottom of the ladder, first pick in the draft. If they were to say they wanted to take Cochrane with pick number 1, Port Adelaide come in and match that bid. Port Adelaide get pick number 1, Richmond get moved down to pick number 2. Richmond then get given a late first round selection to make up for the fact that they have been pushed down the pecking order. Now, it's not a case of if then they bid for Walker and get pushed down to 3, they get another selection. It's limited to 1 selection per club. But what Carlton beg to stand to gain here if they finish last is they get Cody Walker, pick number 1. They don't have a matched bid, but they could do the smart play, nominate Cochrane, Port Adelaide then take pick number 1, Carlton get pick number 2, then they get given an extra pick because they've got a first round pick from Sydney this year as well for the Curnow trade. So they'll essentially take 2 first round picks to 3, which could potentially push back to their pick that they're given into the first of the second round. But they've got a lot to gain versus whether Essendon, West Coast or Richmond finish dead last, because then they could nominate, Carlton then have to match the bid, so they're giving up a little bit of equity to do that, and they wouldn't be gaining that extra pick by getting their pick pushed back because they're matching that bid. So there's a lot of questions around whether they are tanking, and I have had some thought processes about that. Maybe trying to decipher where Carlton's at as a club is a separate video in its own right that we can talk about. But there's some serious stuff going down at Carlton. I think there's more than meets the eye as to the outcome to what we're seeing right now with that list. Looking at the injuries for this game, there were a couple. Dan Butler for St Kilda did a hamstring, so he will miss a few weeks. We had Dean for Carlton, the young defender, go down with a groin injury, as well as Lockie Cowan, copper head knock. Now, that hasn't been confirmed as concussive or not, so I don't know whether he will miss time, but it's just good to mention those. And we will dive into team statistics here, because I definitely feel this was a one-sided affair in some retrospects. It's not going to be one of those cases where the game was close on all fronts, because I definitely feel there was some push and pull that went the way of St Kilda a lot more. Disposals around the ground was incredibly close. St Kilda only had 9 more disposals in the contest, so Carlton matched them. Carlton actually had more inside 50s, 50 to 46, and still failed to kick a winnable score. Now, obviously, they cleaned things up. They kicked 9 goals, 15. If they were more accurate, that stems the flow. Don't get me wrong. But they scored at 54% in this game, Carlton, which is actually up on their season average, whereas St Kilda have only been averaging a little bit more than Carlton forward half of the ball, but they had 12% more effectiveness in this game overall inside 50. It was a good masterclass from them moving the ball forward, and I feel when they did move the ball forward, they had a lot more answers than what Carlton were prepared for, and some players are getting exposed around the ground. So much so that some media experts are trying to say, should Patrick Cripps think about going elsewhere? Should they trade Jacob Wiedering? It's really a shambles at Carlton. I mean, it could be worse. Richmond only just won their first game, for example. Essendon are in all sorts. West Coast have dropped off the face of the earth recently. But Carlton seem to be the one in the spotlight the most, because I feel so much more expectation was expected from them this year. I personally thought they would push. I think I had them out of that top 10 configuration, but a lot of people would have had them inside of that. So to see them failing to fire is rather strange. The stoppage game, St Kilda only won by 8, but they dominated the clearance by 10. Possessions around the ground were evenly spread. They both took 118 marks for the game, which is huge, because Carlton only average 88 marks. St Kilda average 103. So there's a disparity already going in on average, but they took the same amount of marks. Both tried to take the sting out of the game. We know St Kilda are a very defensively based team because of Ross Lyon's style of gameplay. Kick the ball backwards, sideways, maintain possession, take the sting out, we'll move the ball forward when we need to. Carlton, a lot in this game, were forced into precarious positions where they were doing really silly things like handballing it too much, getting ran down in tackles, making silly turnovers. It's rough to look at when you consider looking at the highest rated players in this game. Outside of a couple like Brody Kemp kicks 3 goals 3. If Kemp doesn't kick those 3 goals, he was very much not a huge factor in this game at all. Ben Ainsworth kicks 2, but outside of that, doesn't really offer too much. Ollie Florent played a really good game. Nick Newman played a really good game. But looking at where it counts the most, Adam Chera might have 25, but outside of that, doesn't have much input in the game. Sam Walsh is kept to 24. Jarga Smith, maybe easy to kind of write him off because he's only in his first year. He has 21. But as we go further down the list, we look at Patrick Cripps, only manages 14 touches for the entire game. Harry Mackay doesn't kick a goal. Mark Pittonet, as their main ruckman, has 4 disposals. Actually, they're both their ruckman. So Liam Reedy and Mark Pittonet, between them, had 10 disposals for the game. When you have a look at the ruck line for St Kilda had Rowan Marshall, who had 22. So Rowan Marshall himself had double the disposal count of both their ruckmen. And then you look at Tom De Koning. Tom De Koning himself had more disposals than both of their ruckmen. There's a lot of question marks. And I feel, and I've said it on social media a lot, Carlton's losing the game ahead of time at the selection table. The fact that Blake Acres isn't being selected, George Hewitt, these types of players, what more do they need to do to play? You've got teams that have been coming up against them where a Hewitt running a tagging role on a Nasiah Wanganeen-Malira, for example, would have been great. Having Blake Acres on the outside, we know he's got a lot of great ball use within him. He's got good pace. He hits the scoreboard. Why aren't they getting a game? Michael Voss sitting here trying to say that Hewitt's not getting any game time because it's for the better of the team is a load of bullshit, as far as I'm concerned. I'm not going to dwell on it too much. I don't want to be here for too long. Well, I'm probably been here for a lot longer than I should have already been. So we're just going to turn attention to the votes for this game. The one vote I gave to Rowan Marshall, 22 disposals, 9 of which were contested, 9 marks, 3 tackles, 10 hitouts, 4 clearances, 474 metres gained, 3 goals and 5 score involvements. The 2 vote I gave to Cooper Sharman, very underrated player. 17 disposals, 6 were contested, 9 marks, 1 tackle, 422 metres gained, 2 goals, 3 goal assists, 13 score involvements. This guy had 17 touches, 13 of them resulted in score. Talk about quality for quantity, holy hell. Best on ground, though, was Nasiah Wanganeen-Malira, starting to really find some form. 31 disposals, 8 of which were contested, 3 marks, 1 tackle, 5 clearances, 573 metres gained, 1 goal, and 11 score involvements. St Kilda need to just find some continuity in their game in order to be a believable team, to build belief in their fan base. Like, their fan base believe they can get it done, but externally from that, not many people are believing that yet because they've failed to fire any true shots. So if they can start building continuity in their game, people will start believing. Carlton, on the other hand, locked them up for a bottom 4 finish. It's just whether or not they get the first pick for bottoming out or not. Keep a close eye on it, because I'm telling you now, I think there might be more to a potential tanking discussion. And for those Carlton fans that might be watching thinking I'm delirious, you only need to have a look at how this year's played out to really start putting pieces together and start to conclusively come to an end of thinking, well, you know what? Maybe they are tanking. Maybe there is more to this. Just keep an eye on it. The first of 2 on Sunday was at the SCG, Sydney hosting Melbourne. And this is one of the better games of the season, I feel, just given how both just went hell and leather until the final siren. It was Sydney in the end by 17 points in a contest where both teams well cleared 100 points. And we need to take the time to just really appreciate the fact that Melbourne this year were an unknown commodity. A lot of people had written them off because they lost Petrarca, they lost Oliver, but 6 from their last 8 games, they have registered over 100 points, which I think is fantastic. As I said though, it was Sydney by 17 points, and despite a late charge from Melbourne, it was the break before halftime and then the third quarter where Sydney found their most dominance in this contest. At quarter time, Melbourne led 5-4-34 to 5-2-32. At halftime, Sydney had blown out to 10-8-68, leading 7-4-46. Three-quarter time, Sydney led 13-15-93, leading 10-8-68. And the final scoreline saw Sydney defeat Melbourne 19-17-131 to 17-12-114. Both teams, like Sydney, went on to kick, and they were very inaccurate in the second half because they went on to kick 9 goals, 9. And Melbourne went on to kick 10 goals, 8. Could have been either side of the contest here. There were some huge individual performances in this game, which we will highlight when the time comes. Retrospectively, Myercheck has done a hamstring injury for Melbourne, so that's going to throw them out of whack, out of their forward line configuration. That could mean we see Max Gawn play a more forward-based role, which is what Stephen King has been hanging his hat on for recent weeks. Being able to play Max Heath in the ruck, Max Gawn poses an almost impossible matchup coming out of that forward half. So that could be something Melbourne persists with moving forward. Despite the scoreline, this was very one-sided statistically, so much so that Sydney had 90 more disposals in this game, or close enough to it. 425 disposals for Sydney, 338 for Melbourne. Inside 50s was incredibly close, considering they almost had a 100 disposal disparity between the two of them. Sydney had 63 inside 50s, Melbourne had 59. Both of which are pretty much on the average that they've had this year. Around the ground, there was not much percentage. There was 5% splitting them. Inside 50, Sydney ran at 60%. Melbourne ran at 52%. The free kick count was evenly split, 20 apiece. The ruck contest, Brodie Grundy got the better of the pairing of Heath and Gawn, 46-38. Clearance game, Melbourne win by 1. So, again, hit-outs might go one way, but clearances are now being decided because the game's being played differently because these ruck rules open up closer contests. The having to jump and contest the ball now means that some midfielders can get in and under a little bit better in the contest. It was a great battle. Absolutely great battle to watch. It was the uncontested possessions where Sydney absolutely dominated. 269 to 185. Marks around the ground, 39 more marks to Sydney, 95 to 56. We know Sydney, again, one of those teams that like to just chip around and find their next target, and that's why they're sitting on top of the ladder. That's why they've been, in my opinion, the best team this year so far. They're just so methodical with their processes and their systems around the ground. Defensively speaking, both laid over 60 tackles, both laid over 10 inside 50. It was a great contest again. As I said, Melbourne really played out of their skin late. Again, I don't know whether you can reflect that, or maybe Sydney taking their foot off the pedal a little bit, allowing Melbourne to come in. Melbourne did something very similar against Richmond the week prior. It was a tight contest for 3 quarters, and then Melbourne had that burst in the final term, which is what they did here against Sydney. Sydney just had too much of a gap on them at the time that it was too big to surmount at the end of the day, unfortunately. But Melbourne proving a lot of people wrong. It's just, with this injury to Myercheck, be interesting to see how they formulate themselves forward half of the ball moving forward. For the votes in this game, I did land on 3 Sydney players. If I'm being a little bit rough on people, and anybody from Melbourne deserved a little bit of love. Tom Sparrow had a good outing. Cozzy Pickett popped off late, but I thought he left it a little bit too late. The 3 Swans that I voted for, though, their stats speak for themselves. I'm giving the 1 vote to Isaac Heaney. 33 disposals, 16 of which were contested, 4 marks, 5 tackles, 3 clearances, 530 metres gained, 2 goal assists, and 8 score involvements. The 2 vote I'm giving to Brodie Grundy. 26 disposals, 15 contested, 2 marks, 4 tackles, 45 hitouts, 11 clearances, 316 metres gained, 1 goal, and 12 score involvements. And best on ground, he popped off in a big way here, and he could be one of the bargain signings of the season, given what he got brought in for trade worth. Malcolm Rosas had 14 disposals, 6 were contested, 4 marks, 3 tackles, 214 metres gained, kicked 7, and had 9 score involvements. I just think you could probably make an argument for Brodie Grundy getting the 3 vote here, and I might be a little bit stiff, but just given how close this game ended up being, I think those 7 goals that Rosas kicked, and especially how they came about and they were scored, is something that deserves best on ground mention. For Sydney, top of the ladder, 40. I think they're 40% clear of the next best, close enough to it. They're really starting to firm as one of the premiership favourites, if they're not the outright favourite at this point in time. Love how they're going about it. As a neutral supporter, just how they move that ball is sensational. And they're doing it without Errol Goulden, who is arguably their best ball user, transitioning from outside 50 to inside 50. Melbourne, I still think, even though I had them placed a little bit further down the ladder, they're still shaping to be a wildcard round prospect this year, and should be getting a lot more admiration, I feel, for the efforts they're putting in, especially given some of the scores they've been registering on the back of having to get kids to stand tall and step into some A-grader holes that have been left through trade. They're looking really impressive. They're going to be a hell of a lot better moving forward than a lot of people give them credit for. They're great to watch. It's fun. Both of these teams are fun to watch. Am I wrong? The final game of the round was for the Expansion Cup. Gold Coast, GWS, People's First Stadium, which saw Gold Coast walk away with a 20-point win. There is a contentious point to come out of this game that we're going to talk about momentarily. I can't get my head around it, but I'm kind of not surprised, because the AFL, I feel, and the MRO are still very, very much so weak as piss. But anyway, at quarter time, Gold Coast led 3-4-22 to 1-7-13. At half time, they led by the slimmest of margins, 4-8-32, leading 3-10-28. At three-quarter time, Gold Coast led 8-13-61 to 5-13-43, and the final scoreline was 11-17-83, defeating 8-15-63. And a very inaccurate game in a season where I've said numerous times percentage is going to play factor. Both teams scoring over 15 behinds is absolutely insane. The talking point I want to talk about here is not the fact that Ryan Angwin ended with concussion and got sent off, because I thought that tackle was great. I don't know if any sanction has been given for this yet. Somebody might clear it up in the comment section. I'll probably go research it myself. I probably should have done due diligence and research prior, but I thought it was a perfect tackle, and just a little bit of unfortunate circumstance that an arm was pinned. He's made contact to the ground with his head. But the talking discussion I feel that's not being had in this game, which needs to be, is the fact that Clayton Oliver gets tackled to the ground in what could have been a slinging motion. Then Ben Long walks up to him, grabs him by either side of the head and like shakes him while he's on the ground, which I don't that would fall under the taunting retrospect, right? Which the AFL have come out and said it's going to be a fine, it's going to be a free kick, whatever. No remonstration or anything came out of that on the field, no free kick or anything. I think it was a 50 that was paid after the fact, because then Clayton Oliver gets up off the ground and Ben Long just swings a fucking open hand and slaps him over the side of the head, gives away a 50. But if that's intentional high contact, so wouldn't that warrant like a week's suspension? No case to answer for. Some people might think, this guy is fucking weak as piss. He's wanting a player to get sanctioned for slapping a dude in the head. He made intentional contact, and it could be considered, even though it's open-handed, could be considered striking. So I just don't understand. Damien Hardwick even came out and turned around and said that Long should have copped a week for it. So when your own coach throws you under the bus, and Hardwick isn't one to mince his words, he'll say what he means. So I just feel, again, it's just another example of how far gone the MRO truly is, where we're happy to, a gut punch 100 metres off the ball or a little love tap off the ball is an automatic week, but Ben Long hits a bloke in the head intentionally, and regardless of whether it's a slap or a closed fist, doesn't have any case to answer for. I don't know how that sits with me. Feel free to disagree in the comment section down below. Breaking down the team stats of this game, I think it actually will be rather close, just off of reflection of watching the game myself. It was hard to split these two for a very long period of time during this game. And deservingly so. Gold Coast only just winning the disposal battle 397 to 371. Inside 50s, 58 to 49, the way of the Gold Coast. So both had great looks, but both scoring a little over 40, well, close enough to 45%, both inside 50. Around the contest, 78% effective around the ground for the Gold Coast, 70% for GWS. So they were using the ball well enough, but inside 50, both were just failing to land those finishing blows. Gold Coast getting the better of the Giants in the ruck battle by 11, 38 to 27, but the Giants win the clearance battle 37 to 29. So again, reflection on gone are the days where if you dominate the hitouts, you're going to win the contest, because players are now just smarter to click onto these rules and the changes that are going down. They had an even split in the center, but it was around the stoppage clearances where the differentiation went down. Uncontested went the way of Gold Coast by the way of 42, and the way of 13 in the way of contested to the Giants. Around the ground, though, a huge discrepancy with marks. 71 marks taken by GWS, 126 taken by the Gold Coast, in a year where they're only averaging 87. That is huge, and it's down on input from GWS because they average 92, only managed the 71. Now, they've taken a structural change in the fact that Lockie Ash is that intercepting kind of defender. He's also involved in all of those sideways and backward interchange moves that they make. When moving the ball, they like to get it back to him. He'll kick it backwards. He'll move it sideways. He's that linking player. But he's had more midfield exposure. I think he had 61% of the CBA attendances for this game. So trying to play him in a different way and expose him to the game a little bit more to mix things up, which I'm all for, but it just made GWS look a little bit shaky in their defensive 50, which is something we're not used to seeing, especially when it comes to the intercept game from that club. Looking at the votes for this game, because we can just turn attention to it, because outside of the Ben Long thing, there's not really much to really talk about here. Clayton Oliver, I gave the 1 vote to. I thought he was great in the midfield for GWS. 32 disposals, 13 were contested, 5 marks, 4 tackles, 9 clearances, 337 metres gained, 1 goal assist, and 9 score involvements. The 2 vote I gave to Christian Petrarca, hasn't missed a beat since coming back from that hamstring injury. 29 disposals, 13 were contested, 4 marks, 4 tackles, 6 clearances, 441 metres gained, 2 goals, 2 goal assists, and 9 score involvements. Best on ground to me was John Noble. He just has some games sometimes where he just blows everything out of the water, and this was one of those outings. 35 disposals, 6 were contested, 12 marks, 1 tackle, 1 clearance, 827 metres gained, 1 goal, and 2 score involvements. Now, not as big of an impact on the scoreboard, but he plays usually that deeper back pocket, half-back role A lot of the linking work that started from defense to set up those scores came from him. He was just intercepting everything. He was back there to make sure pressure acts were high. He was great to watch. I thought he was best on, and the commentary team just kept raving about how good he was. Both of these teams are top 8 caliber to myself, but when they're kicking so many behinds and blemishes in games like this, you start to question the seriousness of how competitive they might truly be able to be against those other teams in that configuration. GWS obviously still have players to come back. Tom Green, Sam Taylor, Josh Kelly I think's out for the year, and so is Tom Green, but those players make GWS so infinitely greater, and I think Taylor's only a couple of weeks away from coming back, which shores up that defensive half so much. Rao didn't play this game for the Gold Coast, so they've got an excuse in the way of they're missing the Brownlow medalists from last year. Does he take them to that next gear, though? I'm not too sure. They've got some selection pushes as well, obviously playing Reed, Ugelhagen, and King up forward this week. They've still got the likes of Walter on the outside. They've got some other players that could push for selection, but Gold Coast haven't been as prominent as they were at the start of the year. They have dropped off quite a bit, so it'll be interesting to see where both of these teams go from this point in time, because I feel, as I said, both can play finals football, and both this year I feel should play finals football. I think Gold Coast will finish in the top 8, whereas GWS will finish in that wildcard configuration, but it's just really weird to see two teams that are usually just so offensively sound and forward half of the ball so great just struggle to make a contest of it, especially GWS with all the misses early. They could have been in the contest and in front in this contest really early, and that would have shifted momentum entirely to their side, so maybe they've only got themselves to blame for the outcome that ended up being. With all the votes tallied up, this is how the leaderboard is currently set, with the top 5 for this year's MVP award. In 5th place on 9 votes, I have Sydney's Brodie Grundy and Isaac Heaney. In 4th place on 10 votes, I have Western Bulldogs' Marcus Bontempelli, St Kilda's Nasiah Wanganeen-Malira, and Fremantle's Shea Bolton. In 3rd place on 11 votes, I have the Gold Coast's Christian Petrarca and North Melbourne's Tristan Cherry. In 2nd place on 13 votes, I have Geelong's Bailey Smith and North Melbourne's Harry Sheasel, and in 1st place on 14 votes, I have Port Adelaide's Zach Butters and Collingwood's Nick Dacos. More importantly, after 8 rounds of football, this is how the AFL ladder is situated. In 1st place, tied for 1st place rather, Sydney Swans is in 1st and Fremantle is in 2nd, both on 28 points, but separated by 32%, which is huge. In 3rd place, we have Hawthorn, sitting on 26 outright, just 2 points behind that draw. Obviously, had it gone the way of Hawthorn, they would currently still be sitting in 3rd place, but tied for 1st. So again, points can come into calculation now as well. In 4th place, we have Brisbane. In 5th place, we have the Gold Coast. And finishing the top 6, we have Geelong. However, in 7th place, we have Melbourne, all of which are tied on 20 points apiece, separated by percentage. To round out the wildcard section, we have Collingwood in 8th on 18 points, and then we have St Kilda in 9th and North Melbourne in 10th on 16 points. But following that, we have Adelaide in 11th, the Bulldogs in 12th, both on 16 points as well. Again, out of that wildcard round because of percentage. Outside of that, we have Port Adelaide and GWS tied on 12 points in 13th and 14th respectively, West Coast in 15th on 8 points, and then we have Carlton in 16th, Essendon in 17th, and Richmond in 18th, all on 4 points apiece, separated by percentage. And hey, if Richmond can pick up another win and start moving out of that bottom spot, we might be giving up pick number 1, but I made that bold call at the start of the year saying I thought Richmond would win more games than Essendon, and we might be on here. We might be fucking on. In order to officially recap the round and lock everything away, it is time to announce my team of the week for round 8. In defence, I have John Noble and Darcy Wilmot in the back pockets and Dan Houston at full back, with Bailey Dale and Wayne Malira on the half-back flanks and Callum Mills at centre half-back. Across the centre, I have Jack Ross and Shea Bolton on the wings and Sam Berry in the centre, with Brodie Grundy in the ruck, Max Holmes at ruck rover, and Christian Petrarca at ruck rover. In the forward line, I have Zach Bailey and Malcolm Rosas on the half-forward flanks and Jeremy Cameron at centre-half forward, with Seth Campbell and Logan Morris in the forward pockets and Noah Bolter at full forward. On the interchange, I have Jai Newcomb, Connor McDonald, Luke Jackson, Tristan Cherry, and Isaac Heaney. The coach of the week is Adam Uze, and I couldn't split the assistant coaches of the week, so I've given it both to Justin Longmuir and Matthew Nix. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, the round has officially been recapped. Thank you for joining me for another video. I'm glad that we were able to get this one out and we are back on track. Do hope you guys enjoyed and appreciate the time and effort that goes into these types of videos. I'd appreciate it a lot if you hit that like button down below if you did. Do leave a comment down below if you've got anything you wish to talk about coming out of round 8, or if you've got any recommendations for some content you would like to see dropped on this channel. And hit that subscribe button down below if you want to get on board the community we are building together here. But that's it from me, guys. I'm out of here, and as always, I will catch you guys next time.